Hey friends, welcome to my channel. So today we are gonna see, what if Naruto had an unwanted relationship with his daughter Akeno? Also check out my Patreon page for 18+ exclusive mature content. We will now proceed to the video. We can have therapy. The air in Ichiraku ramen hung thick and heavy, a symphony of slurping noodles and satisfied sighs. Normally, the chaos was a comfort, a familiar buzz that vibrated through him like a second heartbeat. The rhythmic clatter of bowls, the sizzle of broth hitting the wok, the shouts of orders across the kitchen, it was a language he spoke fluently, a world he commanded. Tonight, though, it grated on his nerves. Each clang of a pot, each shouted order, felt like a jarring interruption to the quiet storm brewing inside him. A storm he couldn't quite name, but one he knew was about to break. He leaned against the stainless steel counter, the cool metal a stark contrast to the heat radiating from the stove. He absently wiped his hands on his apron, the familiar grease stains a small comfort. He closed his eyes, picturing Rias. God, Rias. He loved the way she could walk into a room and own it, not with flashy jutsu or demonic power. None of that existed here, in this world, thankfully. No. Rias commanded attention with the sheer force of her presence. In New York, surrounded by concrete and ambition, she'd been a splash of crimson in a grayscale world. Her elegance, honed from years of, well, he wasn't entirely sure what. Ballet lessons, finishing school, secret heiress training, whatever it wasn't anything from his world. It was something intrinsically her. A quiet grace that made him feel simultaneously clumsy and captivated. And that fire, that quiet intensity that simmered beneath her composed surface, it had always drawn him to her like a moth to a flame. Okay, maybe not a flame. Bad analogy, considering her, heritage, even if it was just metaphorical in this reality. More like a moth to a really stylish, expensive lamp. He snorted softly at the thought. Rias would probably appreciate the designer lamp analogy. She had a thing for mid-century modern. He flipped a pan of noodles, the familiar motion oddly soothing. The muscle memory, the practiced flick of the wrist, the satisfying whoosh as the noodles arced through the air, it was a small piece of normalcy in a world that felt increasingly off-kilter. She believed in him, always had. Even when his ramen recipes were disastrous experiments that tasted suspiciously like burnt rubber, she'd tasted them, forced a smile, and said something encouraging like, "It has potential, Naruto." He chuckled softly, the sound swallowed by the kitchen's din. He remembered one particularly horrific attempt at a kimchi-infused broth that had nearly singed his eyebrows off. Rias had taken one cautious sip, her face contorting in a valiant effort to remain polite, and then declared, with utmost sincerity, "It's certainly unique." He'd laughed so hard he'd nearly choked. He pushed the thought away, a fresh wave of nausea rolling over him. Thinking about Rias, about their shared history, about the easy laughter they used to share, it was like picking at a scab, a painful reminder of what was lost. And Kushina, their little Kushina. He pictured her now, probably asleep in her ridiculously princess-themed bedroom, surrounded by plush unicorns and sparkly pillows. That ridiculously huge house Rias had bought in Los Angeles. Right, Los Angeles. The word felt like a lead weight in his stomach, dragging him down. He'd only been to LA a couple of times, and each time it felt like visiting another planet. All sunshine and palm trees and, well, Rias. She fit there, he supposed. She'd always talked about missing the ocean. The warmth, the whatever else LA had that New York didn't. He'd never understood it. He was a city boy, born and bred. The constant hum of the streets, the energy, the grit, it was in his blood. His stomach twisted into a tight knot. Kushina was the best of both of them. Rias's quiet grace and his own goofy grin rolled into one pint-sized package of sunshine. A small, fragile bridge between two worlds that were now drifting apart. He missed her fiercely, a constant ache in his chest, a hollowness that no amount of ramen could fill. He closed his eyes again, trying to conjure her image, the feel of her small hand in his, the sound of her laughter echoing in his ears. It was like trying to grasp smoke, the memory fading just as he reached for it. The silence of her studio was a stark contrast to the cacophony of Naruto's world. A welcome contrast. Here, amidst the muted tones of fabric swatches and the clean lines of her designs, she could almost breathe. Almost. The air still felt thick with unspoken words, with the ghost of his boisterous laughter, the phantom scent of ramen broth clinging to her clothes. She pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the task at hand, draping a length of emerald green silk over a dress form. The fabric flowed like water, cool and smooth against her skin. This studio, bathed in the soft glow of the California sun, was her sanctuary. A space where she could be Rias, not Naruto's wife, not Kushina's mother, just Rias. The designer, the artist, the woman who dreamed in shades of crimson and cobalt. In New York, tucked away in their cramped apartment above Ichiraku, her creativity had felt stifled. Like a delicate bonsai tree forced to grow in a too small pot. Naruto. Even the thought of him brought a smile to her lips, quickly followed by a pang of something complicated. A tangled knot of affection, resentment, and a lingering sense of loss. His loyalty, unwavering and sometimes infuriatingly stubborn, had been a constant in her life for so long. Like the steady thump of a bass drum, always there, grounding her, sometimes driving her mad. He was a whirlwind of energy, a force of nature that could sweep her off her feet with his infectious enthusiasm. One minute he'd be covered in flour, frantically kneading dough, the next he'd be grinning at her, his bright blue eyes sparkling with mischief, pulling her into a spontaneous dance in the middle of their tiny kitchen. He could make her laugh until her sides ached, even when she felt like crying. Which, lately, had been more often than she cared to admit. She ran a hand over a bolt of silk, the smooth texture a small comfort. The rich jewel tones, the subtle shimmer of the fabric, these were the things that spoke to her soul. She'd always loved the way his hands, calloused from years of kneading dough and wielding kitchen knives, felt against her skin. A strange tenderness, considering. Rough, yet gentle, capable of creating both culinary masterpieces and comforting caresses. The memory of his touch sent a shiver down her spine, a phantom sensation that both soothed and unsettled her. Here, in Los Angeles, surrounded by the familiar scent of eucalyptus and the gentle hum of the Pacific, she could reclaim the parts of herself that had faded in New York. The parts that had been buried beneath the weight of expectations, the demands of being Naruto's wife, the constant need to be calm in his storm. She'd poured her energy into supporting his dreams, into being his rock, his muse, his everything. And somewhere along the way, she'd lost sight of her own. The designer, the artist, the woman who didn't have to constantly play the role of the supportive wife to a culinary whirlwind. She closed her eyes, picturing her latest collection, flowing gowns in vibrant hues, inspired by the fiery sunsets she'd watched from her childhood home. In New York, her designs had felt muted. Too practical, too New York. Here, she could embrace the bold, the unconventional, the unapologetically feminine. She could let her creativity run wild, like the bougainvillea that climbed the walls of her new home. Kushina would thrive here, she was sure of it. The sunshine, the space, the slower pace, it would be good for both of them. Kushina needed room to grow, to explore, to be a child, not just the daughter of the ramen king of the Lower East Side. She needed a mother who was present, not one who was constantly distracted by the demands of her husband's ever-expanding culinary empire. And Rias needed to find herself again. To rediscover the woman she was before she became Mrs. Uzumaki. The woman who dreamed in silk and color, the woman who yearned to create beauty, the woman who deserved to have her own spotlight. The mediator's office. The beige walls of the mediator's office seemed to absorb all the light and sound, leaving a sterile, echoing emptiness. It smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaning spray and something vaguely floral, like a funeral home. Naruto shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the stiff upholstery digging into his back. The silence amplified the nervous energy thrumming through him, a jittery hummingbird trapped in his chest. He tugged at the collar of his shirt, wishing he'd worn something less orange. He glanced at Rias, perched across from him like a crimson-haired statue. Her posture was impeccable, her expression carefully neutral, a mask he knew all too well. He could feel her gaze on him, a tangible weight in the still air, making the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. He avoided her eyes, focusing instead on the swirling pattern in the cheap linoleum floor. The mediator, a woman with kind eyes and a soothing voice that reminded him of his grandmother, smiled gently. "So," she began, her voice a soft counterpoint to the oppressive silence, "I've read through what you've both written. It's a beautiful exercise, isn't it? Sharing what you love about each other." Naruto swallowed hard, the lump in his throat suddenly the size of a baseball. He hadn't realized he'd have to actually read it aloud. He'd scribbled his thoughts down in the back of a ramen order pad, his handwriting a chaotic mess of hurried kanji and half-formed English words. Rias's elegant script, penned in a sleek, silver fountain pen, mocked him from the page. It looked like something out of a calligraphy textbook, all graceful loops and precise flourishes. He cleared his throat, trying to dislodge the sudden dryness that had taken root there, and began to read, his voice rougher than usual, cracking with an unexpected emotion he couldn't quite place. He stumbled over the words, feeling his face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and something else. Pride, affection, a painful nostalgia for something he knew was already gone. He wasn't sure, he just knew it felt raw, exposed. The mediator's words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken irony. A beautiful exercise, right? Because dissecting the remnants of their marriage in a sterile room that smelled faintly of disinfectant was exactly how she envisioned spending her Tuesday afternoon. She watched Naruto fidget in his chair, his usual boundless energy contained, for once, by the confines of the stiff office furniture. He looked uncomfortable, out of place in his bright orange jacket, like a tropical bird trapped in a beige cage. She almost smiled, then caught herself. This wasn't the time for amusement. This was serious, final. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the inevitable awkwardness. She'd written her piece on crisp, white stationery, her handwriting precise and controlled, each word carefully chosen, a curated collection of memories and emotions. She began to read, her voice steady and clear, a practiced performance honed from years of auditions and stage performances. Her words, carefully chosen, painted a picture of the man she'd fallen in love with, the man who made her feel safe and cherished. The man who could make her laugh until her sides ached with a single goofy grin. The man who, despite his flaws, had held her heart captive for so long. But beneath the surface, beneath the carefully constructed facade of affection and appreciation, a different story simmered. A story of unspoken resentments, of stifled ambitions, of a slow, creeping sense of disappointment. A yearning for something more, something different, something she couldn't quite articulate, even to herself. She could feel Naruto's gaze on her as she read, a mixture of confusion and something else. Hurt, longing. She couldn't decipher it, and she didn't want to. "I've found a place here in Los Angeles," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Saying them aloud, making them real, felt like severing a thread, a final snip that unraveled the already frayed tapestry of their lives. She'd practiced this moment 1,000 times in her head, each rehearsal ending differently. Sometimes she imagined screaming, unleashing the torrent of frustration and resentment that had been simmering inside her for months. Other times, she pictured herself dissolving into tears, begging him to understand, to change, to make things right again. But now, faced with his bewildered expression, all she could manage was a quiet, carefully measured statement of fact. "Kushina's already enrolled in school." Naruto's expression shifted, the easygoing smile he'd worn throughout the mediator's introduction replaced by a flicker of confusion, then hurt. It was a subtle shift, a fleeting shadow that crossed his features, but she saw it. She felt it, a sharp pang of guilt twisting in her gut. She'd known this would hurt him. She just hadn't anticipated the intensity of it, the way his bright blue eyes, usually sparkling with mischief and warmth, suddenly dimmed, clouded with a bewilderment that mirrored her own from months ago. Los Angeles, he repeated, his voice flat, devoid of its usual boisterous energy. The single word hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken accusations, with the weight of all the unsaid things that had fractured their foundation. You didn't tell me. She looked down at her hands, the perfectly manicured nails a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside her. She traced the delicate curve of her wedding ring, the cool metal a familiar weight on her finger. A weight she knew she'd soon have to shed. I wanted to do this in person, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The lie felt like sandpaper against her throat. She hadn't wanted to do this in person. She'd wanted to avoid this conversation altogether, to send a carefully worded email, a detached text message, anything to avoid the raw, messy reality of seeing the hurt in his eyes. But her lawyer, Akeno, had insisted. It's better this way, Rias. Cleaner. More. Civilized. Right. Because there was nothing civilized about the slow, agonizing death of a marriage. I wanted to do this, right, she added, the words feeling hollow even to her own ears. What did right even mean in this situation? Was there a right way to break someone's heart? A right way to dismantle a family? A right way to tell the man you once loved more than anything that you no longer wanted to share your life with him? She doubted it. She finally met his gaze, bracing herself for the inevitable wave of anger, the recriminations, the accusations. But instead, she saw a raw vulnerability that disarmed her. He looked lost, like a ship, adrift at sea, its anchor severed, its sails torn. And in that moment, a flicker of doubt, a tiny spark of uncertainty, ignited in her chest. Had she made the right decision? Was this truly the best path forward, for her, for Kushina, for him? The questions swirled in her mind, unanswered, unwelcome. She pushed them away, steeling herself against the wave of empathy that threatened to engulf her. She couldn't afford to second-guess herself now. She'd made her choice. She'd chosen Los Angeles, she'd chosen independence, she'd chosen herself. And she couldn't go back. Not now, not ever. She took a deep breath, the sterile air of the mediator's office filling her lungs, a cold, clean break from the suffocating weight of their shared past. It was time to move forward. For Kushina, for herself. Los Angeles. She'd already moved Kushina to Los Angeles. The words hit him like a physical blow, a sucker punch to the gut that stole his breath and left him gasping for air. He felt a cold dread spreading through him, a chilling premonition of a future he hadn't allowed himself to imagine. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were supposed to talk, to figure things out, to stay together. Weren't they? He'd envisioned late-night conversations, fueled by lukewarm instant coffee and leftover ramen, tearful apologies and whispered promises of change. He'd pictured them rebuilding, brick by fragile brick, the foundation of their family, their love, their life. He'd been a fool. But, Kushina, me, he stammered, the words failing him, dissolving into a choked whisper. He felt a lump forming in his throat, a thick, suffocating knot of confusion and hurt. He looked at Rias, searching her eyes for some sign, some flicker of the connection they'd once shared. Some spark of the woman who had laughed with him, cried with him, built a life with him. But all he saw was a polite, distant sadness. A carefully constructed wall, brick by carefully placed brick, shutting him out. Rias, we can fix this, he pleaded, his voice cracking with a desperation he hadn't realized he possessed. We can go to therapy. I can, I'll do anything. The words tumbled out of him, a jumbled mess of promises he wasn't even sure he could keep. He just knew he had to do something, say something, anything to stop this slow-motion train wreck before it derailed completely. She met his gaze, her violet eyes shimmering with something. Regret, pity, he couldn't tell. Naruto, she began, her voice soft, but firm, I don't think you understand. I'm not unhappy, not exactly. I need something different. The word hung in the air between them, a sharp, jagged shard of ice piercing the fragile bubble of hope he'd been clinging. G2. Different. It wasn't an accusation, not exactly. But it felt like one. An indictment of their life together, of their shared dreams, of him. He wanted to argue, to fight, to tell her she was wrong, that they were meant to be together. That they had something special. But the words wouldn't come. They were trapped in his throat, choked by the sudden, crushing weight of reality. The mediator, sensing the escalating tension, cleared her throat. Perhaps we can schedule another session next week. We can discuss custody arrangements, visitation schedules. Naruto barely heard her. He was still reeling from the blow, the realization that Rias had already moved on, that she had a plan, a life that didn't include him. He shook his head, the movement slow and deliberate. No, he said, his voice hoarse. I don't think so. Rias nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. No, she echoed, her voice equally flat. Not today. The mediator sighed, a small sound of defeat in the sterile room. She gathered her papers, her movements brisk and efficient, as if eager to escape the suffocating tension that had settled over them. Well, she said, her voice laced with a forced cheerfulness, I'm always here if you change your minds. Naruto didn't respond. He couldn't. He just sat there, numb, watching Rias gather her things, her movements graceful and precise, as if she were preparing for a fashion show, not the dismantling of their marriage. He felt a profound sense of loss, a hollow ache in his chest that mirrored the echoing emptiness of the room. The reality of the impending divorce, the finality of it, was sinking in, a cold, hard weight settling in his gut. He was adrift, unmoored, lost in a sea of uncertainty. Sunlight, a thick, honeyed Los Angeles sunlight, streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, warming the polished wood floors of her new studio. Dust motes danced in the golden rays, a silent, swirling ballet that mirrored the turmoil in her own heart. She traced the outline of a dress design, a sleek, flowing gown meant to evoke effortless grace. The lines on the page were sharp, decisive, everything she wished she could be. But the knot in her stomach, tight and persistent, betrayed her carefully constructed composure. The house was beautiful, a sprawling Spanish-style villa nestled in the hills overlooking the city. It echoed with a kind of quiet she hadn't realized she craved, a stark contrast to the constant, frenetic hum of their cramped New York apartment. Here, the silence wasn't empty, it was full of possibilities. Full of the space she needed to breathe, to think, to be Rias, not just Naruto's wife. Sakura, perched on a stool nearby, flipped through a fashion magazine, her brow furrowed in a concentration that mirrored Rias's own, though for entirely different reasons. Sakura was dissecting hemlines and color palettes. Rias was dissecting the remnants of her life. He called again. Sakura said, not looking up. Her voice was soft, careful, like she was handling a wounded bird. Rias knew Sakura was worried about her, worried about them both. She'd been Rias's rock through this whole mess, a steady presence in a world that felt increasingly unsteady. Rias sighed, the sound escaping her like air from a punctured tire. She set her pencil down, the smooth graphite feeling suddenly alien against her fingertips. And, she asked, the word barely a whisper. And he wants to talk to Kushina. Like, now. Sakura finally looked up, her green eyes filled with a mix of sympathy and exasperation. He sounds lost, Rias. Lost. The word echoed in the spacious room, bouncing off the white walls and high ceilings, settling like a weight on Rias's chest. It was the same word that whispered in her head late at night, when the California sun dipped below the horizon and the house grew quiet, 2Q. UIET. Lost, but not together. Lost in separate worlds, orbiting each other like distant stars, their gravitational pull still palpable, yet impossibly far apart. She pictured Naruto in their New York apartment, surrounded by the remnants of their life together, the mismatched mugs they'd collected. On their travels, the overflowing bookshelves crammed with his dog-eared manga and her design textbooks, the framed photo of them and Kushina on their first trip to Coney Island, their faces bright with laughter and sticky with cotton candy. She wondered if he'd packed those things away, or if they still sat there, gathering dust, like ghosts of a life they'd left behind. She pushed the feeling down, a familiar ache that had become her constant companion. Focusing on the sketch in front of her, she forced her fingers to pick up the pencil again. The sleek lines of the gown seemed to mock her, a symbol of the effortless grace she so desperately craved but couldn't seem to grasp. Her hand trembled slightly, betraying the turmoil beneath the surface. "Kushina's at her art class," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll have him call back later." Later. The word felt like a lie, a flimsy shield against the inevitable. Later, when she could brace herself for the inevitable wave of his voice, thick with longing and confusion, the same longing and confusion that mirrored her own. Later, when she could pretend, for both their sakes, that this new distance was a good thing, a necessary thing. Later, when the California sun would set, casting long shadows across the room, and the quiet of the house would once again become a refuge, a space to hide from the truth. A truth that whispered, insistent and undeniable, that even in separate worlds, their lives were still inextricably linked, by the invisible thread of a love that refused to be completely extinguished. The ramen broth, usually a source of comfort and familiarity, a balm for even the roughest of days, tasted like ash in his mouth. He stared at the swirling steam rising from the pot, the fragrant aroma usually a source of pride, now a cloying, suffocating presence. He saw not the perfectly cooked noodles, the tender slices of chashu, the vibrant green of the scallions, but Rias's face, framed by the crimson hair he used to burr. Why his face inhaling the scent of her lavender shampoo, a scent that now haunted his dreams. The Ichiraku kitchen, usually a buzzing hive of activity, a place of controlled chaos where he reigned supreme, felt oppressive, the air thick with unspoken tension. The rhythmic clatter of pots and pans, the sizzle of oil, the shouts of orders, sounds that usually formed a comforting symphony, now felt like a mocking soundtrack to the silence echoing in his heart. A silence that had taken root the moment Rias had uttered those words, "I'm moving back to Los Angeles." "Naruto, you're burning the chashu." Iruka's voice, sharp and concerned, cut through the fog of his thoughts like a kunai through smoke. Iruka, his oldest friend, his confidant, the steady hand at his side since they were both awkward, ramen-slurping teenagers. Iruka, who'd seen him through countless heartbreaks, culinary disasters, and existential crises. Even Iruka couldn't penetrate the wall of numbness that had encased him since Rias left. He blinked, startled back to reality, the present crashing in on him like a tidal wave. The pork belly, carefully marinated and slow-cooked for hours, once succulent and glistening with a perfect caramelized glaze, was now charred and smoking, a blackened offering to the gods of heartbreak. He swore under his breath, a low, guttural sound that vibrated with frustration and self-reproach. He tossed the ruined meat into the trash with a sigh, the clang of the metal lid echoing the hollow ache in his chest. This was the third batch he'd ruined today. His focus, usually laser-sharp in the kitchen, a honed skill developed over years of practice and passion, was scattered, fractured like a dropped bowl, the pieces impossible to reassemble. He scrubbed at the blackened pan with a vengeance, the rough scouring pad a meager outlet for the anger and grief churning inside him. He felt like a pressure cooker about to explode, the steam building, with no release valve in sight. He imagined himself throwing the pan across the kitchen, watching it shatter against the wall, the fragments mirroring the shattered pieces of his life. But he didn't. He just kept scrubbing, the repetitive motion a small, futile attempt to regain control, to find some semblance of order in the chow's that had become his world. Just then, the front door chimed, the cheerful jingle a jarring interruption to the oppressive silence. It signaled a new customer, an eager soul anticipating a bowl of his award-winning ramen. He took a deep breath, forcing the knot of emotion down, until it settled like a lead weight in his stomach. He plastered a fake smile on his face, the muscles in his cheeks aching with the effort, the expression feeling stiff and unnatural. Fake smiles had become his new specialty, a mask he wore to hide the emptiness behind it. He turned to greet the customer, the practiced words of welcome automatic, meaningless. "Welcome to Ichiraku. What can I get for you?" he asked, the cheerful tone a stark contrast to the hollow echo in his soul. He felt like a puppet, going through the motions, his heart a vacant space where love and laughter used to reside. He ladled broth into a bowl, the familiar motion feeling foreign, the warmth of the liquid failing to penetrate the icy chill that had settled around him. He was lost, adrift in a sea of grief, the familiar shores of his life receding into the distance. And the worst part was, he knew, deep down, that he was the one who had set sail. Naruto, her voice, when it finally came, was like a cool breeze on a scorching day. A relief, a momentary reprieve from the desert of silence he'd been wandering in. And yet, a fresh wave of pain, sharp and stinging, all at once. "Rias," he breathed, the name a prayer on his lips, a plea for connection, for forgiveness, for something he couldn't quite articulate. He clutched the phone like a lifeline, his knuckles white, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Rias," his voice, rough with sleeplessness and something else she couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of anger, hurt, maybe even a flicker of fear, sent a shiver down her spine. A familiar shiver, one that used to be a thrill, a spark of anticipation. Now, it was a tremor of unease, a warning signal. "Naruto," she replied, her voice carefully neutral, a shield against the emotions threatening to crack her composure. She gripped the edge of her drafting table, the smooth wood a grounding presence against the swirling vortex of their conversation. "Naruto, how's Kushina? Can I talk to her?" He tried to keep his voice light, casual, the kind of voice he used to use when ordering extra noodles, but the desperation clawed at his throat, making the words come out thick and strained. He imagined Kushina's bright smile, her infectious giggle, the way she used to wrap her small arms around his neck, her hair smelling of sunshine and crayons. The image tightened the knot in his chest. "Rias, she's at her art class. I'll have her call you back later." Later. The word, so simple, so innocuous, felt like a dismissal, a polite brush off, a subtle assertion of control. She hated the distance in her own voice, the cool, detached tone that wasn't her, not the real her, the Rias who used to tease him mercilessly, who used to steal kisses in the crowded Ichiraku kitchen, who used to whisper secrets in the dark. But she couldn't bridge that distance, not yet. The hurt was too raw, the anger too fresh. "Naruto, art class. What art class? You never mentioned." He felt a prickle of annoyance, a spark of the frustration that had been simmering beneath the surface. He was being kept out of the loop, relegated to the sidelines of his daughter's life. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. "Rias, Naruto, we've been over this. I'm making decisions for Kushina now. I'm her primary caregiver." The words tasted like acid, sharp and bitter on her tongue. She didn't want to say them, to wield them like a weapon, but they hung in the air between them, HEA. VY and unavoidable, the unspoken truth of their new reality. Naruto, a cold knot tightened in his gut, a visceral reaction to her words. Primary caregiver. The words slammed into him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He wasn't her father anymore. He was, what? A visitor, a weekend dad, a voice on the phone, a distant echo in her life. The thought made his stomach churn, a sickening swirl of fear and resentment. "Naruto, that's not fair, Rias. You can't just." "Rias, fair. What's fair, Naruto? Is it fair that I spent years supporting your dreams, putting my own aspirations on hold? Is it fair that I felt like a ghost in my own life?" Her voice rose, the carefully constructed composure cracking, revealing the raw emotion beneath. "Naruto, that's not true. I always supported." "Rias, supported me how?" "By expecting me to be your cheerleader, your muse, your silent partner. By never asking what I wanted, what I needed." "Naruto, I just thought." "Rias, you thought what?" "That I'd be content to live in your shadow forever. That I wouldn't want more for myself, for Kushina." The words tumbled out, a torrent of frustration and resentment she'd been holding back for far too long. "Rias," she heard his silence, the heavy breathing on the other end of the line. It was a silence filled with unspoken words, with regrets and accusations, with the ghost of a love that had once been vibrant and alive. She closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. I'll have Kushina call you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then, she hung up, the click of the phone echoing the finality of their conversation, the severing of another fragile thread. Sasuke leaned against the doorframe of Naruto's apartment, arms crossed, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of concern and impatience. He looked like a sleek, black panther, poised and ready to pounce. He held a thick manila envelope, its stark white surface a harbinger of bad news, a stark contrast to the muted grays and blues of Naruto's disheveled living room. The envelope felt heavy, weighted with the finality of Rias's decision, a physical manifestation of the chasm that had opened up between them. "You need to face facts, Naruto," Sasuke said, his voice blunt but not unkind, a surgeon's scalpel slicing through the thick fog of Naruto's denial. "She's not coming back." Naruto glared at the envelope, then at Sasuke, his gaze flickering with a mixture of anger and defiance. "Don't say that," he growled, his voice rough with unshed tears. "We can still fix this. We can go to therapy, or something." He trailed off, the conviction in his voice fading, replaced by a hollow ache of uncertainty. He knew, deep down, that Sasuke was right, but the truth was a bitter pill to swallow. Sasuke sighed, pushing himself off the doorframe and stepping into the apartment. The air was thick with the smell of stale ramen, unwashed dishes, and despair, a potent cocktail of Naruto's current emotional state. It was a far cry from the warm, inviting scent of home-cooked meals and laughter that used to fill the space, a stark reminder of what he'd lost. "Look," Sasuke said, his voice softening slightly, "I get it. You're hurting. You're clinging to the hope that things will magically go back to the way they were. But burying your head in the sand isn't going to help Kushina. She needs you to be strong, Naruto. She needs you to fight for her." Quote. Naruto sank onto the worn couch, the springs groaning beneath his weight. He ran a hand through his messy blonde hair, his fingers tangling in the knots. He felt exhausted, drained, like he'd run a marathon and finished last. "I don't want to fight, Sasuke," he mumbled, his voice thick with despair. "I just want my family back." Sasuke sat down beside him, the silence stretching between them, heavy and uncomfortable. He knew Naruto's aversion to conflict, his tendency to avoid unpleasantness at all costs. But this wasn't a ramen competition or a prank war. This was about Kushina. "This isn't about you and Rias anymore, Naruto," Sasuke said, his voice firm but gentle. "This is about your daughter. You need a lawyer. You need to protect your rights, ensure you have a fair custody arrangement. You need to be present in her life, even if it's not the way you envisioned it." Naruto stared at the floor, the worn wooden planks blurring through the film of tears that had gathered in his eyes. He thought of Kushina's bright smile, her infectious giggle, the way she used to cling to his leg, calling him Daddy, in her sweet, high-pitched voice. He couldn't bear the thought of losing those moments, of becoming a stranger in her life. "She's already enrolled Kushina in a new school," Naruto said, his voice barely a whisper, the words laced with bitterness. "An art school. She didn't even ask me." Sasuke nodded, his expression grim. "That's why you need to act. Now, Naruto. Rias is making moves, and you're letting her. You need to show her, and the court, that you're a dedicated father, that you're not going to let her push you out of Kushina's life." He picked up the manila envelope and handed it to Naruto. "This is from her lawyer. It outlines her terms for custody and visitation. Read it, then call me. I know a good lawyer who can help you." Naruto hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the envelope. He felt a surge of anger, of resentment, of the overwhelming urge to tear the envelope to shreds and pretend none of this was happening. But then he thought of Kushina, of her bright, trusting eyes, of the unconditional love that shone in her smile. He took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping slightly, the weight of responsibility settling upon him. He took the envelope from Sasuke, his fingers brushing against Sasuke's, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken understanding between them. "Okay," he said, his voice hoarse but resolute. "Okay, I'll call him." Sasuke nodded, a flicker of approval in his dark eyes. He stood up, clapping Naruto on the shoulder, a gesture of support, of solidarity, of the unwavering bond of friendship. "That's my boy," he said, a rare smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Now, go make some decent ramen. You're starting to stink the place up." Naruto managed a weak smile in return, a small crack in the wall of despair that had been closing in on him. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, a grueling battle fought in sterile courtrooms and tense phone calls. But he also knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he would fight for Kushina, for his right to be her father, for the chance to be a part of her life, no matter the cost. He would fight, not for himself, but for the small, bright light that was his daughter, the one constant in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. The fluorescent lights of Tsunade's law office cast harsh shadows across the mahogany desk, making Naruto feel even more out of place. Ace in his faded orange hoodie and worn jeans. The chair beneath him, sleek leather that probably cost more than a month's worth of ramen supplies, creaked softly as he shifted his weight for the 100th time. His fingers drummed an anxious rhythm on his thigh, a nervous habit he'd never quite outgrown. Tsunade herself sat across from him, her honey-colored eyes sharp and assessing. Her presence filled the room like a force of nature, commanding attention even in stillness. The neat stack of papers before her, his life with Rias reduced to cold, legal terminology, seemed to mock him with their crisp formality. "Stop fidgeting," Tsunade said, not unkindly but with unmistakable authority. "And tell me exactly what happened during your last conversation with Rias." Naruto's hand instinctively reached for the back of his neck, another nervous tell. "We argued about Kushina's schedule. About me not being involved enough in the decisions." The words tasted bitter, like overcooked broth. I don't understand how we got here, you know. One day we were sharing breakfast, Kushina spilling cereal everywhere, Rias laughing at my terrible jokes, and now. He trailed off, his gaze catching on a framed law degree on the wall. The elegant script blurred slightly as unwanted memories flooded in. Rias's own degrees, carefully arranged in their home office, her pride when she'd hung them, the way the morning light would catch the glass and create rainbows on the wall that Kushina would try to catch. Tsunade's manicured fingers tapped once on the desk, drawing his attention back. "Naruto, I need you to understand something fundamental about divorce proceedings. Your emotions, while valid, aren't going to help us in court. What matters are facts, documentation, and strategy. But this isn't about strategy." The words burst from him like steam from a pressure cooker. "This is about my family, my daughter, he caught himself before saying, "my Rias," because she wasn't his anymore, was she? "This is exactly about strategy," Tsunade countered, leaning forward slightly. "Akeno Himehime isn't known for playing nice. She's going to come at us with everything she has, and we need to be prepared. Tell me about your financial situation." The change of subject felt like whiplash. Naruto ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "The restaurant's doing well. We've got the original location in Manhattan and the new branch in Brooklyn. Rias, she helped with the business side of things, in the beginning. She's always been better with numbers than me. And your living situation, still in my apartment in the East Village. It's close to Ichiraku's original location. Kushina's room is still exactly how she left it. Her stuffed fox collection, the art supplies Rias got her for her birthday, glow in the dark stars on the ceiling." His voice cracked slightly, and he cleared his throat. "Sorry." Tsunade's expression softened marginally. "Don't apologize. But do listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. This process is going to get worse before it gets better. Akeno will try to paint you as an absent father, too focused on your restaurant to be a proper parent. We need to counter that narrative." The words hit him like a physical blow, forcing the air from his lungs. The thought of anyone questioning his devotion to Kushina made his chest tight with anger and fear. He thought of their Sunday morning ramen-making sessions, flour covering them both as he taught her his secrets, her laughter echoing through the kitchen. How could anyone question that? I would never, he started, but Tsunade held up a hand. It doesn't matter what you would never do. What matters is what we can prove. We need documentation of every moment you've spent with Kushina, every decision you've been involved in, every contribution you've made to her well-being. And Naruto. She waited until he met her gaze. You need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this gets ugly. Really ugly. The morning sun slanted through the office windows, casting long shadows across the carpet. Somewhere in Los Angeles, Kushina was probably just waking up, maybe asking Rias to make her favorite breakfast, the one thing he'd actually taught Rias to cook properly. The distance had never felt more vast, more insurmountable. I understand, he said finally, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Just help me keep my daughter in my life. Please. Rias traced her fingers along the edge of her desk, the polished surface cool against her skin as Los Angeles sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Akeno's corner office. The city sprawled below, a glittering tapestry of promise and possibility that had drawn her back. Yet today, its beauty felt distant, overshadowed by the weight of the papers spread before her. Akeno sat across from her, elegant and composed in a tailored charcoal suit, her long dark hair cascading over one shoulder. Her presence had always been reassuring, but today there was an edge to her familiar smile that spoke of battles to come. Tsunade Senju, Akeno mused, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against the file in front of her. I should have known Naruto would seek her out. She's formidable, old school. Known for her passionate advocacy. Quote. Rias felt a familiar tightness in her chest. What does that mean for us? It means we need to be prepared. Akeno leaned forward, her violet eyes intent. Tsunade will push for joint custody, maybe even primary custody if she thinks she can make a case for it. She'll use the restaurant's proximity to Kushina's old school, Naruto's flexible schedule as a business owner, his deep community ties in New York. The words stirred something painful in Rias's memory. Sunday mornings at Ichiraku, Kushina perched on a stool at the counter, face glowing as she watched head Naruto prepare their special, father-daughter ramen. The regular customers cooing over her drawings, the staff treating her like family. A whole world she'd pulled her daughter away from. I'm not trying to keep him from Kushina, Rias said, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't stay there anymore. Everything in New York felt like it was closing in on me, like I was slowly disappearing into someone else's life. Akeno's expression softened slightly. I know, but we need to focus on the legal realities. Tell me about Kushina's adjustment to LA. Rias straightened, grateful for the shift in focus. She's enrolled in the Creative Academy. Her art teacher says she's gifted. You should see the paintings she's been bringing home. She's made friends in her class, and she's starting tennis lessons next week. She seems lighter here. More herself. Good. That's exactly what we need to emphasize. Akeno made a note in her elegant handwriting. And your work situation. The design studio is taking off. I've already landed 2 major clients, and there's talk of a collaboration with a major fashion house. Rias paused, remembering how Naruto had always supported her dreams, even when they seemed impossible. The flexible schedule means I can be there for Kushina's important moments. And your support system here. Soccer has been incredible. She helps with Kushina when I have late meetings, and she's only 15 minutes away. Plus, my parents are in San Diego. They visit almost every weekend now. Akeno nodded approvingly, but her expression remained serious. Rias, I need you to understand something. Naruto's legal team will likely try to paint you as selfish, as someone who put her career ahead of her family's stability. They'll question why you couldn't pursue your dreams in New York, why you needed to uproot Kushina's life. The words struck like physical blows, each one hitting a tender spot of guilt she'd been trying to ignore. But I didn't. That's not what this was about. I know, Akeno said gently. But perception matters in these cases. We need to show that your move to LA was in Kushina's best interests. Better educational opportunities, stronger family support, a chance for both you and your daughter to thrive. Quote. Rias closed her eyes briefly, remembering the night before she'd left New York. How she'd stood in Kushina's room, watching her sleep, torn between the certainty that she needed to leave and the fear that she was making a terrible mistake. The memory of Naruto's face, when she'd told him about LA, still haunted her. The shock, the hurt, the confusion that had morphed into anger. What do you need from me? She asked finally, opening her eyes to meet Akeno's steady gaze. Documentation. Every school report, every art class evaluation, every indication that Kushina is thriving here. Records of your work schedule showing how it accommodates her needs. And, Akeno hesitated slightly, we need to be prepared for the possibility that Naruto might fight dirty. He wouldn't, Rias said automatically, but even as the words left her mouth, she wasn't sure anymore. The Naruto she'd fallen in love with wouldn't, but this new Naruto, shaped by hurt and legal advice. She couldn't predict what he might do. The California sun had shifted, casting long shadows across Akeno's desk. Somewhere in New York, Naruto was probably at Ichiraku, losing himself in the rhythm of cooking, in the art of perfect ramen that had first drawn them together. She remembered watching him work, the intensity of his focus, the joy he took in creating something that made people happy. Now that same intensity would be turned against her, channeled into a fight she never wanted. Just, help me protect what matters, she said softly, echoing words she couldn't know Naruto had spoken across the country. Help me do what's right for Kushina. Akeno reached across the desk, squeezing her hand briefly. That's exactly what we're going to do. But Rias, she waited until their eyes met. This is going to be a battle. Are you ready for that? The fluorescent lights in the conference room buzzed overhead like angry wasps, their harsh glare reflecting off the polished mahogany table where Naruto sat, his hands clenched beneath the surface. Across from him, Akeno Himehime arranged her papers with deliberate precision, each movement calculated and sharp. Tsunade sat beside him, a steady presence, but even her confidence couldn't quell the churning in his stomach. Please state your name for the record, Akeno began, her voice smooth as silk but edged with steel. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the stenotype machine, waiting. Naruto Uzumaki, he answered, hating how his voice wavered slightly. He could feel the weight of multiple pairs of eyes on him. The court reporter, both lawyers, and somewhere in the corner, a junior associate taking notes. Mr. Uzumaki, how many hours per week would you say you spend at your restaurant, Ichiraku? Quote. The question seemed simple enough, but Naruto could sense the trap lurking beneath its surface. He glanced at Tsunade, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. It varies, he said carefully. Usually between 50 and 60 hours, but I have flexibility with my schedule, especially for Kushina's activities. Akeno's perfectly manicured nail tapped against her notepad. 50 to 60 hours. That's quite a lot of time away from home, isn't it? Objection, Tsunade interrupted, argumentative. I'll rephrase, Akeno smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. During your marriage to my client, who was primarily responsible for Kushina's day-to-day care. The question hit him like a punch to the gut. Images flashed through his mind. Rias helping Kushina with homework at the kitchen counter. Rias coordinating playdates and doctor's appointments. Rias somehow managing everything while he lost himself in the rhythm of the kitchen. We both took care of her, he said, his throat tight. Yes, Rias handled more of the daily routine, but I was there for all the important moments. I taught Kushina to cook, helped with her art projects, took her to the park every weekend. Quote, but you weren't there for dinner most nights, were you? I own a restaurant. Dinner service is our busiest time. So that's a no, Akeno pressed. Naruto felt heat rising in his face. I made sure to have family dinner at least twice a week, and I always made Kushina's lunch the next day to Ma. K up for it, make up for it, Akeno repeated, the words hanging in the air like smoke. Mr. Uzumaki, would you say you often felt the need to make up for your absences? Objection. Tsunade cut in again. Counsel is editorializing. Withdrawn, Akeno said smoothly. Let's talk about the new Brooklyn location of Ichiraku. When did you begin planning that expansion? Naruto's stomach dropped. He knew where this was going. About 8 months ago, around the same time my client began expressing dissatisfaction with the marriage. That's not. It wasn't connected, Naruto protested, but the words sounded weak even to his own ears. Did you discuss this major business decision with my client before proceeding? He could feel sweat beading at the back of his neck. I told her about it, yes. Did you ask for her input? Consider how it might impact your family life. Quote, Rias always supported my dreams, he said, an edge of desperation creeping into his voice. Just like I supported hers. The Brooklyn location was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. Akeno's eyebrow arched. Yet you made the decision unilaterally, didn't you? Just as you've made many decisions throughout your marriage. That's not fair, Naruto burst out, his composure cracking. I've always put my family first. Everything I've done, every hour I've worked, every decision I've made, it was all for them. For us. The room fell silent except for the soft click of the court reporter's machine. Tsunade's hand touched his arm briefly, a warning to calm down. Naruto took a deep breath, trying to center himself the way he did in the kitchen when things got chaotic. Mr. Uzumaki, Akeno continued, her voice deceptively gentle now, can you tell me the name of Kushina's current art teacher in Los Angeles? Quote, the question blindsided him. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Her tennis instructor. The friends she's made in her new school. Each question felt like a needle, precise and painful. No. Rias hasn't shared those details with me. Have you asked? The simple question hung in the air like an accusation. Naruto stared down at his hands, remembering their last phone call, how it had devolved into arguments about schedules and custody arrangements. How he'd been so focused on his own pain that he'd forgotten to ask about the little details of Kushina's new life. No, he admitted quietly. I haven't. Akeno gathered her papers, each movement precise and calculated. No further questions for now. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights seemed louder now, filling the silence with their persistent hum. Naruto felt hollow, scraped raw, like a pot that had been scoured too harshly. He barely registered Tsunade's reassuring words as the deposition ended, barely noticed the others filing out of the room. All he could think about was Kushina, and how many questions he hadn't asked, how many details of her new life he'd missed while fighting against the change he couldn't prevent. Somewhere in Los Angeles, his daughter was probably painting something beautiful, making new friends, growing into someone he was starting to fear he might not recognize. The thought terrified him more than any question Akeno could ask. Rias stood at her floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the Los Angeles sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her studio was quiet now, the usual bustle of assistants and clients replaced by a heavy stillness that seemed to echo her inner turmoil. The sketchbook in front of her lay open but untouched, the blank pages a stark reminder of her scattered focus. Her phone buzzed. Sakura, sending a photo of Kushina at her art class. Her daughter's face was bright with concentration, a smudge of blue paint on her cheek as she worked on what appeared to be an abstract landscape. The sight made her heart clench painfully. Just finished class, Sakura's text read. She asked about Naruto again. Rias set the phone down, her fingers trembling slightly. She'd heard about the deposition from Akeno, how Naruto had struggled with the questions, how his composure had cracked when pressed about his involvement in Kushina's life. The victory should have felt satisfying, a validation of her decisions. Instead, it sat like lead in her stomach. She walked to her desk, pulling open the bottom drawer where she kept a small wooden box. Inside were photographs she couldn't bring herself to display but couldn't bear to throw away either. Her fingers found one near the bottom. Naruto in the Ichiraku kitchen, teaching a younger Kushina how to shape ramen noodles. Both of their faces were dusted with flour, their matching grins radiant with joy. "You're torturing yourself." Sakura's voice came from the doorway, making Rias start. She hadn't heard her sister come in. How was she, really? Rias asked, carefully returning the photo to its box. Sakura crossed the room, setting her bag down on one of the minimalist chairs. "She's doing well. Her art teacher says she has a unique perspective." But, she hesitated. "But what?" "She drew another family portrait today. All three of you, in front of Ichiraku." Sakura pulled a folded paper from her bag, handling it carefully. Rias took the drawing with unsteady hands. Kushina's artistic talent was evident in the details. Naruto's whisker-like birthmarks that she'd always loved to trace, Rias's own crimson hair flowing in an imaginary wind, their daughter between them, all three figures connected by linked hands. "She still believes you'll work it out," Sakura said softly. "That daddy will come to LA, or you'll go back to New York, or—" "Stop," Rias whispered, but the word came out choked. She pressed her fingers to her temples, fighting against the pressure building behind her eyes. "Sis, maybe it's time to consider." "Consider what?" Rias cut her off, suddenly angry. "Going back, shrinking myself again to fit into the space he left me. Watching my dreams collect dust while he builds his empire." Quote, "That's not fair and you know it," Sakura countered. "Naruto supported your design work. He was proud of you. Being proud isn't the same as being present." The words burst from her like a dam breaking. "Do you know what Kushina said to me once? Daddy loves his restaurant more than anything." She said it so casually, like it was just a fact of life. And I looked at her, and I saw myself at her age, watching my own father choose his work over and over and... Quote. She broke off, her voice cracking. Sakura moved closer, but Rias held up a hand, needing space. The Los Angeles lights were coming on now, twinkling like earthbound stars. Somewhere in New York, Naruto was probably in his kitchen, losing himself in the rhythms of chopping and stirring, the way H.E. always did when things got too hard. "I love him," Rias admitted, the words barely audible. "I love how he can light up a room just by walking into it. How he believes in people so completely that they can't help but believe in themselves. How he loved me, loves me still, maybe. But love isn't enough when you're disappearing piece by piece." She looked down at Kushina's drawing again, at their linked hands, at the simple happiness captured in crayon and colored pencil. A sob caught in her throat. "What kills me is that he doesn't even see it. In the deposition, Akeno said he kept insisting everything he did was for us. And he believes that, completely and totally. He gave us everything except what we needed most, himself, fully present, not just in the big moment. But in the quiet ones, the everyday ones." Sakura was quiet for a long moment. "Have you told him any of this?" "How can I?" Rias asked, pressing her palm flat against the cool glass of the window. "How do you tell someone that loving them the way they love isn't enough? That their best efforts still left you feeling hollow? That you're terrified of your daughter growing up thinking it's normal for love to feel like waiting?" The sky had darkened completely now, the city lights below creating a tapestry of artificial stars. Rias could see her reflection in the glass, overlaid against the urban landscape, the successful designer, the devoted mother, the woman who had finally found the courage to choose herself. But beneath that reflection, she could still see traces of the girl who had fallen in love with a boy's brill. Yaunt's smile and unwavering determination, who had believed love could conquer anything. A tear slipped down her cheek, then another. In her hands, Kushina's drawing crinkled slightly, the paper bearing the weight of dreams too heavy for its delicate surface. "I just want her to know," Rias whispered, her voice breaking, "that sometimes the bravest kind of love is knowing when to let go." The evening shadows stretched long across Naruto's apartment, the silence broken only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of New York traffic filtering through the windows. He sat on Kushina's bed, surrounded by her stuffed animals, each one carrying memories that now felt like physical weight on his chest. The fox plushie he'd won at Coney Island still sat in its place of honor, slightly worn from years of being squeezed during thunderstorms and bad dreams. Next to it, the art supplies Rias had given her for her birthday remained untouched, the expensive pencils and brushes still arranged exactly as their daughter had left them. His phone lay silent beside him, though he'd checked it a dozen times since leaving Tsunade's office. No messages, no calls. Just the wallpaper. A photo of Kushina at her last birthday party in New York, her face glowing as she blew out the candles on the ramen-shaped cake he'd spent hours perfecting. I really messed up today, didn't I? He spoke to the empty room, picking up the fox plushie. The deposition played over in his mind, each question from Akeno cutting deeper than the last. He hadn't known Kushina's art teacher's name, hadn't asked about her new friends, hadn't been present in the ways that mattered most. A knock at the door startled him. For a wild moment, his heart leapt, but no, Rias had a key, and besides, she was 3,000 miles away. It was Sasuke, letting himself in with the spare key he'd had since they were teenagers. "Thought I'd find you here," Sasuke said, leaning against the doorframe. His usually stoic expression softened slightly at the sight of his best friend sitting among the stuffed animals. "Did Tsunade call you?" "She didn't have to. Iruka said you haven't been to the restaurant all afternoon." Naruto clutched the fox plushie tighter, its synthetic fur damp with tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. "I keep thinking about what Rias said in mediation, about me not being present. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I could build something great, give them everything they deserved." "Naruto. But I was wrong, wasn't I?" His voice cracked. "I was so focused on creating this legacy for Kushina that I missed watching her create her own. Did you know she has an art teacher in LA? She's taking tennis lessons. She's probably made new friends, has favorite places I've never seen, inside jokes I'll never understand." He stood suddenly, moving to Kushina's desk where her last drawing still hung, a family portrait from happier days. His fingers traced the crayon lines of their joined hands. "You know what kills me? When Akeno asked about Kushina's new life, I couldn't answer. Not because Rias is keeping things from me, but because I never asked. I was so angry about them leaving, so hurt, that I forgot to keep being her father. I became the ghost of one instead." Sasuke moved into the room, his presence solid and grounding. "You're not a ghost, Naruto. You're just lost right now." "Lost?" Naruto laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "I'm worse than lost. I'm exactly what Rias said I was. Someone so caught up in providing for his family that he forgot to be part of it." Quote. He walked to the window, looking out at the city lights blurring through his tears. Somewhere out there, Ichiraku's lights were on, the evening service in full swing. The restaurant that had been his dream, his pride, now felt like a monument to everything he'd gotten wrong. "You know what Kushina said to me, the last time I saw her?" His voice was barely a whisper now. "She asked if I would teach her how to make ramen in LA too. Like it was that simple. Like I could just transplant our Sunday traditions across the country. And instead of saying yes, instead of promising to find a way, I got angry. I started arguing with Rias about schedules and custody and..." He pressed his forehead against the cool glass. "I forgot that my daughter was just asking her father to keep teaching her how to make noodles." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken grief. Finally, Sasuke spoke. "So teach her." Quote. "What? Find a way. If you can't be there every Sunday, send her video messages. Mail her ingredients with instructions. Write down your recipes in a journal for her. Show her that love doesn't stop at state lines." Quote. Naruto turned, the fox plushie still clutched in his hands. In the dim light, he could almost pretend the wet spots on its fur were from one of those long-ago thunderstorms, when Kushina would crawl into their bed, squeezing between him and Rias, all three of them safe and together. "I don't know how to be half a father," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to love them from a distance. Then learn, Sasuke said simply. The same way you learn to make ramen. The same way you learn to run a restaurant. The same way you've learned everything else in your life. One step at a time, with your whole heart. Naruto looked around the room one last time, at the unused art supplies, the carefully arranged stuffed animals, the drawing of a family that no longer existed quite the way it was portrayed. Then he pulled out his phone, opened a new message, and began to type. Dear Kushina, I'm sorry I haven't asked about your art classes. Tell me everything, and if you want, maybe this Sunday we can try making ramen together, even if we're apart. I'll teach you my secrets, just like always, because some things, the most important things, don't change, no matter how far apart we are. Love, Dad. The tears came freely now, but for the first time since Rias left, they felt less like an ending and more like the beginning of something new, something different, but maybe, just maybe, something that could still be beautiful in its own broken way. The Los Angeles air hit Naruto like a physical force as he stepped out of the rideshare, thick with unfamiliar warmth and the cloying scent of jasmine. Rias's new house loomed before him, all clean lines and modern angles, so different from their cozy New York apartment that his chest ached at the contrast. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he caught glimpses of an life he wasn't part of, sleek furniture, minimalist decor, and walls bare of family photos that used to crowd their home. His hand trembled slightly as he pressed the doorbell, its unfamiliar chime echoing inside. Each second of waiting felt like an eternity, filled with the weight of all the words left unsaid between them. When the door finally opened, Rias stood there like a stranger in familiar skin, her crimson hair swept into an elegant knot, wearing a flowing dress he'd never seen before. The sight of her knocked the air from his lungs. How could someone feel so achingly familiar and devastatingly foreign all at once? Naruto, she said, her voice carefully neutral, a tone he'd started thinking of as her mediator's office voice. Come in. Kushina's just finishing her homework. He stepped into the house, hyper-aware of the space between them as she led him through the entry hall. The house smelled of lemon furniture polish and fresh flowers, nothing like the mingled aromas of ramen broth and Rias's perfume that had defined their home for so long. The living room was a study in careful curation, everything placed with precise intention, from the artfully arranged coffee top BLE books to the geometric throw pillows. His eyes caught on a familiar stuffed fox perched on a pristine white shelf, Kushina's beloved, Kurama, now looking oddly out of place in this magazine-perfect setting. The sight of it made his throat tight, remembering how they'd bought it together at a street fair in Brooklyn, Kushina squealing with delight as she hugged it close. Papa. Kushina's voice cut through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. She barreled into him, all flying red hair and endless energy, and for a moment, everything else fell away. He caught her in his arms, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo, the same brand they'd always used. At least that hadn't changed. Hey, princess, he managed, his voice rough with emotion. I missed you so much. Over Kushina's head, he caught Rias watching them, her expression unreadable but her hands clasped tightly together, a gesture he recognized from countless moments of hidden anxiety through out their marriage. The sight made something twist in his chest, a mixture of longing and frustration that had become all too familiar. They spent the afternoon at a nearby park, Naruto pushing Kushina on the swings while Rias sat on a bench at a carefully measured distance, pretending to read a magazine but watching them with barely concealed intensity. Every laugh, every shout of, "Higher, Papa," felt precious and fragile, like moments captured in rapidly melting ice. Kushina showed him her new cartwheel technique, practiced on the pristine grass that seemed too perfect to be real, so different from the scrappy patches of green in their local New York park. She chattered about her new school, her art classes, her friend Emma who lived next door, each detail another small reminder of the life taking shape without him. He found himself memorizing every word, storing them away like precious gems to examine later in the hollow quiet of his apartment. He watched her chase a butterfly, her red hair streaming behind her like a banner, so much like her mother's it made his heart clench. She had Rias's grace too, even in her childish movements, a hint of the elegance that had first drawn him to her mother all those years ago. The butterfly led her to a patch of wildflowers, and she began picking them with careful concentration, her small tongue poking out just like his did when he was focused on perfecting a new ramen recipe. When Kushina ran to get ice cream from a passing vendor, Naruto caught Rias's eye. For a moment, the facade cracked, and he saw his own pain reflected in her face, the shared agony of watching their family fragment into pieces, of trying to protect their daughter from the shrapnel of their broken marriage. She's doing well in her new school, Rias offered, her voice soft. Her art teacher says she has real talent. That's great, Naruto replied, fighting to keep his tone even. She always loved drawing at home, he caught himself. Not home anymore, just the apartment. Another reminder of how much had changed. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken words, with all the things they couldn't say in front of Kushina. Instead, they watched their daughter skipping back towards them, ice cream already smeared around her mouth, her smile bright enough to break hearts. This was their new reality. Love and pain intertwined so tightly they couldn't tell where one ended and the other began, all of it wrapped around her daughter like invisible threads pulling them together even as they drifted apart. The discord emerged like a slow-building thunderstorm. It started with something small, as their arguments always did these days. Kushina was telling them about her upcoming school play, her ice cream cone forgotten and dripping onto her fingers as she gestured excitedly. I got the part of the tree fairy, she announced, bouncing on her toes. Mrs. Thompson says I have to practice every day after school for the next 3 weeks. Naruto's face lit up. That's amazing, princess. Maybe I could come back next weekend to help you practice your lines. Actually, Rias cut in, her voice carrying that careful neutrality that made his teeth clench. Kushina has intensive rehearsals every weekend until the performance. The director wants all the children to practice together. Quote, he felt the familiar surge of frustration rising in his chest. Every weekend. Come on, Rias. She needs time with both of us. Surely we can work something out. The schedule is already set, Naruto. Rias's voice took on that edge he'd grown to hate, the one that suggested he was being unreasonable. This is important for her development. You can't just drop in and disrupt her routine whenever you feel like it. Whenever I feel like it. The words came out sharper than he intended. I'm her father, not some random visitor. I have a right to be part of these things. Kushina's ice cream cone tilted dangerously as she looked between them, her excitement fading into that careful watchfulness that broke both their hearts. It's okay, Papa. You can watch the actual play. It's going to be really good, I promise. The attempt at peacekeeping from their 8-year-old daughter hit him like a physical blow. He watched as Rias instinctively reached out to steady Kushina's ice cream cone, her movements precise and maternal, another reminder of all the daily moments he was missing. I should be involved in these decisions, he said, fighting to keep his voice level. We agreed to joint custody, Rias. That means we make these choices together. Quote, joint custody doesn't mean you can override what's best for her, Rias responded, her composure cracking slightly. She needs stability right now, not constant disruption. The play is important to her, and the schedule. The schedule you made without consulting me, he interrupted. Just like you enrolled her in that fancy new school without asking, just like you signed her up for art classes without telling me, just like you. Maybe because every time I try to discuss anything with you, you turn it into an argument about your rights. Rias's voice rose slightly, her careful facade finally showing cracks. This isn't about you, Naruto. It's about what Kushina needs. And you're the only one who knows what she needs. He could hear the bitterness in his voice, hated it, but couldn't seem to stop. Because you're the one who moved her across the country. Because you're the one who. Stop it. Kushina's voice cut through their argument like a knife. Her ice cream cone had fallen to the ground, pink strawberry melting into a puddle at her feet. Her lower lip trembled, but her eyes were fierce. Rias's eyes in his determined expression. Please stop fighting. I don't want to be a tree fairy anymore if it makes you fight. The silence that followed was deafening. Naruto watched a tear roll down his daughter's cheek, and it felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. Rias moved first, kneeling down to Kushina's level, her designer dress getting grass stains that she didn't seem to notice. Sweetheart, no, she said softly. This isn't about the play. Papa and I are we're trying to figure things out. You should absolutely be the tree fairy. Your mom's right, Naruto added quickly, dropping down beside them. We're sorry, princess. Sometimes grown-ups get frustrated, but it's not your fault. Never your fault. Kushina looked between them, her small face so serious it hurt to see. Promise you won't fight anymore. They exchanged glances over her head, a moment of shared pain and guilt that transcended their anger. We promise to try harder, Rias said carefully, always precise with her words. Right, Naruto, right, he agreed, though the word felt hollow. They both knew this wouldn't be the last argument, knew there would be countless more moments like this as they navigated their new reality. But for now, they could at least pretend, for Kushina's sake. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of forced pleasantries and careful distance. They bought Kushina a new ice cream cone, watched her play on the monkey bars, took turns pushing her on the swing, all while maintaining their delicate ceasefire. But the tension lingered like static in the air before a storm, making every interaction feel charged and dangerous. After Naruto left, Rias stood in her pristine kitchen, mechanically loading the dishwasher while Kushina worked on her homework at the counter. The remnants of their awkward early dinner, takeout, because she couldn't bear to cook after the afternoon's tension, sat in containers she knew she should put away. Instead, she found herself staring at a water spot on her expensive marble countertop, seeing nothing but the hurt in Naruto's eyes. When she'd mentioned the play rehearsals, the sound of her phone vibrating against the counter startled her from her reverie. Sakura's name flashed on the screen, as if her sister had sensed her spiraling thoughts from across the city. She glanced at Kushina, still absorbed in her math problems, before stepping onto the balcony. I saw him today, Rias said without preamble, the words tumbling out like water breaking through a dam. The Los Angeles skyline sparkled before her, a view she'd fallen in love with when house hunting. But tonight it felt cold and distant. How bad was it? Sakura's voice was warm with understanding, free of judgment. It made something in Rias's chest loosen slightly. We fought about Kushina's school play, she admitted, sliding down to sit on one of her carefully chosen outdoor chairs. He wants to come back next weekend to help her practice, but there are rehearsals scheduled, and I couldn't deal with him disrupting everything again. She could almost see Sakura's thoughtful nod through the phone. And Kushina, she cried. The words felt like glass in her throat. She dropped her ice cream and cried, and it was our fault. Again. Her fingers found a loose thread on her dress, the one now stained with grass marks, and she tugged at it absently. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice, moving us out here. Stop that. Sakura's voice was firm but gentle. You're allowed to build a life that works for you and Kushina. You're allowed to set boundaries. Quote, but am I setting boundaries or building walls? Rias watched a plane cross the darkening sky, its lights blinking steadily. You should have seen him with her today, Sakura. He loves her so much, and I'm the one keeping them apart. Quote, you're not keeping them apart, Sakura countered. You're creating structure, stability. Remember what Drive Thompson said about children needing routine during divorce. Rias did remember. She had a whole folder of articles and notes from their family therapist, carefully organized in color code. Because that's what good mothers did. They planned and prepared and protected. But today, watching Naruto's face fall as Kushina tried to play peacemaker, she'd felt anything but good. She paused, searching for words. I wish I could explain it to him. How everything feels like it's hanging by a thread, and one small change could make it all fall apart. How every time I see him, I remember all the reasons I fell in love with him, and all the reasons I had to leave, and it tears me apart all over again. Quote, through the glass doors, she could see Kushina packing up her homework, her red hair falling forward as she concentrated on organizing her folders, so like Naruto in her careful attention to the things she cared about. The sight made her heart ache. You're doing the best you can, Sakura said softly. Both of you are. Maybe that's all anyone can do right now. Rias wiped at her eyes, surprised to find them wet. I keep trying to be perfect at this. The perfect divorced mom, the perfect co-parent, the perfect professional woman starting over. But I feel like I'm failing at all of it. You're not failing. Sakura's voice was fierce with loyalty. You're navigating something incredibly difficult with grace and strength. Kushina is happy, healthy, and loved. Your design business is thriving. You're building a new life, piece by piece. That's not failure, Rias. That's courage. Inside, Kushina had moved to the couch with her sketchbook, the one Naruto had given her for her last birthday, covered in ramen bowl doodle. He'd drawn himself. She was working on something. With intense concentration, her small face serious in a way that made her look older than her years. I should go, Rias said finally. Kushina needs help getting ready for bed. Quote, call me anytime, Sakura replied. And Rias, be gentle with yourself. You're allowed to be imperfect at this. After hanging up, Rias stood at the balcony door for a moment longer, watching her daughter draw. The Los Angeles lights were coming on one by one, creating a tapestry of possibility below. She thought about Naruto, probably halfway back to New York by now, carrying his own weight of guilt and grief. She thought about the school play, about boundaries and walls, about the fine line between protecting and isolating. Finally, she took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping back into the warmth of her home, their home, hers and Kushina's. Not perfect, but theirs. For now, maybe that had to be enough. What are you drawing, sweetheart? She asked, settling beside Kushina on the couch. Kushina held up her sketchbook. On the page was a careful drawing of 3 figures, one tall with spiky hair, one with long red hair, and a smaller fig. You were between them. They were all holding hands. Rias felt her heart crack just a little more. The Los Angeles sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded Naruto painfully of Kushina's dropped ice cream cone as his plane climbed through the clouds. He pressed his forehead against the cool window, trying to find some relief from the headache building behind his eyes. Below, the city that held his daughter grew smaller and smaller, each mile adding to the weight in his chest. His phone buzzed. Sasuke, right on schedule. His best friend had an uncanny ability to sense when he was spiraling. For a moment, he considered letting it go to voicemail, but the thought of sitting alone with his thoughts for the next 5 hours was unbearable. How bad? Sasuke's voice was gruff with concern. Naruto closed his eyes, seeing again Kushina's tear-streaked face, the way she'd tried so hard to fix things between her parents. We fought about the school play. She's going to be a tree fairy. There was a pause on the other end. A tree fairy. Yeah. Naruto's laugh came out hollow. She was so excited, Sasuke. Her whole face lit up talking about it. And I ruined it by fighting with Rias about rehearsal schedules, of all things. Quote, you didn't ruin anything, Sasuke said firmly. You're trying to be present in your daughter's life. That's what good fathers do. Good fathers don't make their daughters cry over ice cream cones. The memory of Kushina's fallen cone, pink against the perfect green grass, felt like a metaphor for everything he was failing to hold together. He thought about the drawing he'd seen Kushina working on before he left, 3 figures holding hands. She'd shown it to him proudly, explaining that the tree fairy in her play was supposed to bring people together. The hope in her eyes had nearly undone him. You know what kills me? He continued, his voice rough. When I was leaving, she hugged me so tight, like she was afraid I might disappear. And she whispered, Papa, can you make me a promise? Single quote. I thought she was going to ask me to stop fighting with Rias, but instead, he had to pause, gathering himself. Instead, she asked me to promise that when I come to her play, I'll make my special ramen afterward. Like she's already planning how to bring us all together again. She's a smart kid, Sasuke observed quietly. Too smart, too aware. Naruto watched the last traces of Los Angeles disappear beneath the clouds. She shouldn't have to be the one trying to fix things. That's supposed to be our job, mine and Rias's. The plane leveled out, the seatbelt sign dimming. Around him, other passengers settled in with books and tablets, strangers living their own stories of love and loss. He wondered how many of them were also leaving pieces of their hearts behind in the city below. Maybe, Sasuke said thoughtfully, you need to stop trying to fix things and just focus on being there. In whatever way you can. Quote, the words hit home in a way Naruto hadn't expected. He thought about Kushina's face when she'd shown him her drawing, about Rias watching them from the bench, about the way their daughter kept trying to build bridges between their separate worlds. She asked me if I remembered the first time we made ramen together, he said softly. It was right after she turned 6. She stood on that little step stool Rias bought her, the yellow one with cats on it, and she was so determined to cut the green onions perfectly. Rias took photos of us, remember? She said we looked like twin sons, both of us grinning with noodles hanging from our mouths. I remember, Sasuke said. You showed those photos to everyone who came into Ichiraku for weeks. Quote, Kushina still remembers the recipe. She recited it to me today, word for word. His voice cracked slightly. Even the secret ingredient, the love. Sasuke's voice held a rare warmth. Yeah, Naruto wiped at his eyes. The love. The flight attendant passed by with the drink cart, but Naruto barely noticed. His mind was already racing ahead, plans forming through the fog of exhaustion and heartache. Sasuke, he said suddenly, sitting up straighter. I need your help with something. Remember that old recipe book my mom left me? The one with all her notes in the margins. The one you keep in your safe. Yeah, why? Because I just realized something. Maybe I can't be there for every rehearsal. Maybe I can't fix everything that's broken between me and Rias. But I can still be her papa. I can still show her that love finds ways, even when everything else changes. Quote, he pulled out his phone, opening his notes app with newfound purpose. I'm going to write down every recipe we ever made together, every story behind them, every memory. And before her play, I'm going to bind them all into a book, just for her. Something that says, even when I'm not there, I'm still with you. Even when things are hard, love is still the secret ingredient. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Sasuke spoke again, his voice was suspiciously thick. Need help with the binding? Yeah. Naruto smiled through his tears, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Yeah, I think I do. As the plane carried him back to New York, away from one home and toward another, Naruto began to write. Stories of laughter and spilled sauce, of measuring cups full of love, of a little girl who believed in the magic of bringing people together. Stories that said, in every way he knew how, that some bonds couldn't be broken, not by distance, not by divorce, not even by the weight of grown-up hearts. Trying their best to heal. And somewhere in Los Angeles, in a modern house with clean lines and careful spaces, a little tree fairy was drawing her family back together, one crayon stroke at a time. Thanks for watching.